Okay, welcome back to the Mining Pod. We are in Austin, Texas at Bitcoin Plus Plus. We have the usual news roundup crew, Charlie Spears and Matt Kimmel, and one little extra guest, Walter Smith of Cyber Fund. Welcome to the show, gents.
You're just gonna let him little you like that?
It's all right. The people know.
Well, you guest wrote a great piece called "The Specter of MEV" for Blockspace Media newsletter.
Yeah, that was.
We can't jump ahead yet.
Oh, okay.
Charlie, bad form.
Shoot.
He's still getting his podcasting wings underneath him.
Yeah.
Hey listeners, let's talk about revolutionizing your mining operation with Foreman. This isn't your average management tool. It's an all-in-one solution for reducing costs and significantly boosting your revenue. Foreman brings a cutting-edge dashboard to your fingertips, empowering you with automated energy strategies. This means not only curtailing around real-time prices, but also strategically enhancing your profit margins through demand response. It's about leveraging energy efficiency to its fullest potential. With Foreman, you get a system that scales with your business, inventory management for assets, infrastructure integration, and business intelligence. Foreman elevates the cash flow and production of your entire operation. To see how Foreman can redefine your mining operation standards, visit foreman.mn. With Foreman, you're not just managing a mining operation, you're setting a new standard in the industry.
Are you a retail or institutional investor interested in Bitcoin mining companies? The Miner Mag brings you free data and analysis from all major NASDAQ-listed Bitcoin mining operations to know who stands out. Check out visualized metrics and data-dependent stories at theminermag.com.
No, we'll go back to that. We should go back to that.
I get straight to the content.
Really quick. Tell me about Bitcoin Plus Plus, Charlie, and then let's go into a few conversation topics, including Walt's prolific newsletter.
Okay, so this is actually, I found out this is year 6 of BTC++, but it's year 3 of it being here in Austin. I don't know what preceded it, but it's spearheaded mainly by Nifty Nay Lisa down here in Austin with Base 58, and she's got a Bitcoin education initiative. It's really cool. This particular year is focused on the Bitcoin script restoration project. Maybe it's always been Bitcoin script focused, but like this year particularly is. And it's a dev conference. It's kind of it's not a very flat, it was the least flashy conference I've been to. A bunch of the nerdiest people in Bitcoin. But it's funny because like I'm here simultaneously taking video and interviewing people on what appears to be the early discussions for what might become a soft fork on Bitcoin. Like this is where it starts, the humble beginnings.
Like the next block size war kind of argument, if you will.
Whoa. Slow.
He's still getting his
down.
podcast wings under
No, like connect the dots for people who don't know what soft fork is, though. Like
someone else.
Yeah, so a soft fork is an added software to the Bitcoin protocol that is a confinement or subscribing to a smaller set of rules. So it enables kind of new features without there needing to be an entirely new network because you're not breaking any of the old rules. It's just following something that's within the confines of the rules with kind of an added focus to it. And so some, I guess, prominent ones of the past that you've probably heard of are Taproot and SegWit. SegWit kind of paved the way for what is now the Lightning Network. And Taproot largely still being implemented in a lot of ways, but it kind of, I would say, made the ordinals and inscription landscape easier, even though it didn't fully, it could have been done previously. Is that right?
Yeah, we've talked about that on this pod before, but what's interesting is that I was here last year and I barely followed along, but even in just the past year, because of the ordinals landscape, I've kind of had to jump in the deep end on the Bitcoin technical side. And what's interesting is that some of the, I would say, highest execution people in the ordinals world are actually here at the conference with us because you kind of need to be technical with Bitcoin script and Bitcoin itself to be able to build interesting stuff beyond just the simple JPEG in the ordinals landscape. So notably, featured sponsor of the 3 featured sponsors of this conference are the Taproot Wizards, who you almost could not conceive of sponsoring one of the more technical Bitcoin conferences this time last year.
So in terms of mining news, if people haven't figured that out yet, we're probably not going to talk a lot about it today since we're at the conference.
Yeah.
But this does have long-term implications for Bitcoin miners, which I'll hand it over to Walt to talk about his piece, Specter of MEV on Bitcoin. Walt, from like a mining perspective, what should Bitcoin miners care about for MEV in relationship to this conference too? If you have any thoughts, like talk about OpCap this morning, for example.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on, guys. I think, the most interesting kind of conversation is what kind of expressivity do you end up unlocking? And from that expressivity, how does that kind of change miner incentives? I think, Charlie mentioned the Taproot guys, and they've kind of been at the forefront of this. I think, they're very sarcastic online, and I think that's really helped their brand. And in some ways, probably hurt it in others, but under the hood, I think they're quite technical and know what they're doing. And they even talked today about how, meta protocols, something like Runes, has the potential to really mess up mining incentives, which obviously would mess up the health of the network and break things up. But I think actually, there's some good stuff that'll come out of this expressivity with kind of expressivity. Fees and MEV fees kind of become more relevant to your bottom line. And as we all kind of know, miners are very like profit driven. So if their bottom line becomes more dictated by kind of the expressivity revenue they earn and less, vanilla Coinbase issuance, less money just from Bitcoin inflation as it kind of dwindles, or if those reach some sort of parity, there's actually going to be, I think a big disaggregation in mining pools. So I think, a lot of hash rate is sitting with just a few mining pools right now. I think, MEV is going to kind of break that up, which is, exciting on one lens. It arguably could make the network worse.
I heard you
others.
say MEV is going to break up the centralization on hash rate. Could you dive into that more?
Yeah, and I think people will definitely have different opinions on this. I think mining is pretty global in nature, and it's also very kind of nationalized in the sense that energy is a very sovereign kind of controlled input, and I think that's the backbone of the Bitcoin mining network is energy. So I think that also tends to be nationalized. And I think also if you look at historically kind of network topography or network distribution is probably the right way to say it, across the globe, typically each region, each kind of global power has the own network they prefer. So if you map this into like Ethereum and other ecosystems, which is less and less relevant, obviously, but still kind of a good proxy for Bitcoin, maybe you could view it in some ways as a test network for Bitcoin. Asia, China, they operate on a very different kind of network. So does Europe relative to the US. So I think with Bitcoin mining, you're going to see similar things where miners in certain jurisdictions are going to be aligned with different L2s. They're going to have their own sources of order flow, their own sources of kind of transaction flow. And if that's where the value is kind of being driven from, I think it'll actually break up some of the mining pools. There's some more like, granular logic in kind of the fee variants that we can get into if you want. But I think, the key thing to understand is this isn't like a proof of stake network. It's globally distributed. It's going to be driven to be more globally distributed. And kind of with that, there comes a lot of like national alignment you want, both on the network side, on what kind of side chains or expressivity you're talking about, but also just on the energy side, which I think lends itself to, again, disaggregation of mining pools.
In the competitive world of Bitcoin mining, one name stands out: CleanSpark, America's Bitcoin miner. At CleanSpark, efficiency isn't just a goal, it's our standard. Our sophisticated facilities are built and led by expert teams who care about Bitcoin and the communities we work in. Scale, we've mastered it. Our large-scale operations have set us apart in the industry as examples of community-oriented building. Our track record speaks for itself. We navigate the complexities of the new economy with precision and with skill, continuously achieving operational milestones. Curious about how we do it? We invite you to discover the story behind CleanSpark's success at cleanspark.com.
Yeah, I think everyone else take the angle that MEV incentive probably centralizes hash rate. But again, hash rate split from block production. Do these things go hand in hand? I think we'll have to pull this apart over the next year.
Alex B had an interesting question this morning on the OpCat panel. So they had, is it Ryandale?
It was Ryandale. It was Reardon Code
From Swan. Ryandale from Taproot Wizards.
Rusty from Blockstream.
And then a guy from NIDIG, who's their
Yeah.
open source dev. And Alex B had a question for the OpCat panel. They're discussing like what's next with OpCat or what could happen with OpCat. I suppose the question was, the panel wasn't really about OpCat, but it ended up just being about that.
It was about covenants in general.
But it, of course, ended up being about OpCat. And he said, like, what's going to happen with MEV? Can you guys express this to us? Like, tell us what's going to happen. And at the end of it, I went back to Alex being like, why did you ask that question? He goes, well, I think that there's going to be no MEV on Bitcoin. And it's all a bunch of, like, it's just FUD. It's not real.
I really like this. I really like having this, like, difference of opinion, because it's one of the more interesting conversations right now on, like, well, so there is some MEV. There's more MEV on Bitcoin today than there was a year ago. Thank you, Ordinals. I think there will be more MEV on Bitcoin a year from now. It is a very interesting discussion, and I'm kind of surprised that there's only a handful of people even talking about it. Half of the people even talking about it are sitting at this table. Like,
Are we the smartest people to talk about it?
or are we the dumbest people? I mean, is Alex right? I don't know.
The panel did say like
yeah.
only a bad system would cause MEV. And so they were taking shots at Ethereum and Solana and all these
Yeah.
other networks that, well, Solana tried to introduce MEV itself. So that was even another meta take that we won't get into. But Ethereum, they had a lot of MEV and they've developed an entire market around it, right? Where Beaver builds and all these different validators are out there trying to like scoop up on it. And Bitcoin, they're saying like it's a tighter system, so there's less MEV. So that's why Alex B thinks there's going to be less.
My question with this is like, are they just talking past each other, or are they actually talking about the same definition of MEV?
Yeah.
Because is it talking about MEV in the sense of like what has historically been on Ethereum, or is it just any added revenue that miners may be receiving above that of like the kind of standard sorted mempool block template?
That might be interesting for you guys to explain the two different camps, or there might not even be two different camps. It's pretty fractured definition, but like how would you see it in Ethereum, Charlie? And then what would that look like for like a Matt Corella?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to go back to the Flash Boys blog post, which kind of defined it on ETH, which says it was pretty simple, just difference in ordering transactions. But we used to call MEV minor extractable value. Now we really broaden it to maximum extractable value, which is any additional revenue that can be pocketed by not ordering transactions in a dumb first seen way. You could argue that ordering transactions by fee rate, as we now do, which was not originally in Bitcoin, could be a proto version of MEV. You had a good definition of it in your piece. I forget exactly what the language was, but
Yeah, I think, I'll struggle to cite the exact definition, but I think, you can just kind of generally think of it as just like messing with the protocol incentives in a way that lends itself either to be more advantageous or disadvantageous to like the broader goal that the community is trying to enshrine through the network. So for Bitcoin, that's obviously like decentralization, censorship resistance. So are these like net new fee sources that are accessible only to certain people benefiting that or harming that? And I think, that's where the good versus bad comes in. And then you can kind of categorize it, which I think when people say there's going to be no MEV, like it's a very like, tongue-in-cheek thing to say where you're just trying to sound flashy. Because I think if you listen to some of the other people who've been talking at the conference, Bitcoin arguably like invented MEV, right? Like any sort of external value that you have kind of drives net new behavior in the protocol that is only accessible to, a certain part of the network.
Before we give it to you guys, let me read your article, and this is the definition you gave for MEV. Quote, MEV is the value extracted by power users and nodes, i.e. miners, from apps and users by abusing power over a given block. Extraction typically involves transaction insertion, manipulation, and censorship, along with the reordering of a chain's block. They are both quantifiable, on-chain, and unquantifiable out of the protocol forms of MEV. Generally, more value is captured externally. However, both types induce cartelization, pushing transaction flow to the most sophisticated players. MEV ultimately threatens the decentralization and neutrality of a network, slowly undermining the basis for it to exist. in the first place. So that's a definition.
So per that definition, I would say MEV has existed on Bitcoin for a very long time, right? And that transactions that are simply like out of band, like there's like a famed transaction, right, where it's like they rickrolled the entire blockchain, right? The Rick Astley song was like put in the op return. Yep. It made it a non-standard transaction. Like it wouldn't normally be relayed across the network, but it was given directly to a mining pool.
Was it like
and
14 or 15?
Thus, it was definitely, definitely kind of like
The
a
Opcat song?
historical gem if you look in the chain.
A decade ago.
Oh wait, what song is this?
Never Gonna Give You Up by Rick Astley.
That's put on chain?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
I thought you were talking about the Opcat song.
But like why it's relevant in this conversation is that it's not a typical transaction, right? It is outside of what's called standardness rules, which affects how transactions are relayed across the network. Yeah. And so it had to be given directly to a mining pool for them to include in a block. And so if you're just a normal kind of happy-go-lucky block constructor, you would not normally see that transaction to include. And so it affects protocol incentives, it affects how much revenue mining earns, right? And so I think that definition, Walt, like interested in your take, whether you agree, I would consider that a form of MEV.
Yeah, I think just like anytime you're doing like a non-standard transaction, like I think, that's a good example. I wasn't aware of that. I'm sure, the Holy Relic crowd didn't love it. But I think you can look at the Taproot wizard guys who I think worked with Luxor or someone at the time to push like the 4 megabyte block on chain, the biggest block ever.
At that time.
Heaviest block ever, whatever you want to call it. So if you just think about it from like a pure fundamentals standpoint, that like business development relationship was off chain. That workaround, that agreement was all executed off chain. So it's a transaction that wasn't accessible under any sort of normal conditions to anyone else in the network. So I think anything that does that, is external value that's going to change the incentives of the protocol on chain. And that's really what you're wondering about. And it's designing applications, it's designing transaction propagation systems, it's designing the P2P networking, the side chains, all with that in mind. With, how does this change the incentives for a user? How does it change it for the miner?
I would look at what Marathon's got going, but with their Slipstream product, which allows direct submission of transactions, non-standard transactions in particular, and they charge a premium over the prevailing fee rate. To me, that very clearly falls under MEV, and we can measure that. We don't have to speculate. We can actually measure how much that has generated in additional revenue to Marathon. But imagine this scenario where we actually have some of these roll-ups or roll-up type data posting. Let's say we're putting data blobs on Bitcoin in the future. We're already kind of doing it with JPEGs. Like, there is now going to be other incentive at play to post these data blobs in ways which advantage different people. And there's incentive to work with mining pools or block producers in this capacity. And I just see that as the next frontier for MEV. And the big, one of the obvious potential buyers of this block space are going to be roll-ups. So if roll-ups take off, we could just have normal just roll-up posting onto Bitcoin.
Yeah.
But when has it ever worked like that?
Yeah.
And that is now this giant looming specter of MEV if it does actually take off.
I want to bring it back to mining really quickly. So I'm looking at a chart right now from the Miner Mag, and it's data from hash rate index, and it shows a hash price hitting all-time low, below $50 per petahash per second. And so for miners out there, this instantly, like this is terrible. This is the lowest since November of 2022 when FTX happened. This is post-halvening, so very much so expected. But for these large mining companies that have some capital and political sway, like, do you want to live in this environment, or are you going to start pushing for an opcode and a change to Bitcoin? Especially when you look at like the infrastructure build out there. People aren't always going to be okay with having low hash price and all this volatility with it. So like if you can push for more development on chain, why wouldn't you?
I would caveat that by saying the underlying assumption there is that just basic peer-to-peer monetary transaction demand wouldn't increase and basically stay the same. right? And I don't know if I just say like, as a starter for 10 for that kind of conversation, that's kind of the baseline. And I think if miners believe that Bitcoin adoption will increase, and as a result of higher adoption, there'll be a greater volume of demand for transactions, they will get more transaction fee revenue, right? And that will increase. That being said, these kind of unusual demand vectors for Bitcoin transactions that aren't necessarily just peer-to-peer transfers, like data posting from some kind of roll-up technology, or the kind of like systematized or like front-running arbitrage type of transactions from runes and these fungible token standards and on-chain marketplaces. All of these generate transactions and have different, I think, sensitivity to different transaction fee rates, and all of that, right, would benefit miners as well. But to say that they may want to push for a certain change, I think that's like a whole can of worms argument that I don't necessarily.
I mean, Saylor's kind of pushing for it with ossifying, and it's for his own reasons, right? So like, I think there is that where we're seeing it on the flip side, where like there's a lot of political pressure from his shareholders for that bet to pay off. He knows that, and the surest way for that bet to pay off arguably is for Bitcoin not to change much, there not to be catastrophic back, or at least that's taking out their downside risk. And so I could see miners on the other side, like the pressure from their shareholders is to make more revenue. And so how do you make more revenue? Well, you compete with all these other chains that have demonstrated revenue over time.
Yeah, I think we're all kind of talking about everyone's underlying incentive and kind of the assumptions around those. I think we started the conversation off talking about Bitcoin plus and what the reason was this for and how it relates to mining. And I think something that was really interesting that someone on the Covenants panel said, that I forget who it was basically that the reason they wanted Covenants was not for side chains, it wasn't for roll-up revenue, it wasn't for anything like that. It was just purely for the fact that without increasing that, if fees continue to go higher, it'll be really hard for just an average person to self-custody their Bitcoin. So for them, it was about the censorship resistance, the sovereignty. I think, that's the background kind of incentive that was driving their behavior. I think for miners, Will, you just pointed it out, kind of sailors and kind of miners generally, but I think you can kind of extrapolate that and say, eventually the revenue is going to drop, then there's going to be a reason for this. And the hash rate can even kind of drive this in interesting ways where like Marathon, can support merge mining and nobody else has to either, but they'll earn excess fees, they'll earn excess revenue, and they can do it with Slipstream, they can do it with some sort of side chain, and just merge mine it by themselves. And they have enough hash rate where they can kind of do this, right? And then all the other mining pools are not earning this revenue, their bottom line's going lower, their shareholders are going lower. Now they're getting more private transaction flow. They're harvesting even more MEV. So I think, the protocol is going to naturally kind of evolve where everyone is driven to do this. And even if we don't get it today, even if we don't get it in 18 months, like eventually encryption will just get to the point where like this expressivity exists on Bitcoin anyways.
Need ASIC help? Check out Vitamine, one of Bitmain's certified repair shops located in Washington State with satellite offices in Colorado, Oklahoma, and Texas. PSUs, hashboards, immersion setups, in and out of warranty repair, Vitamine has you covered. Want to train your technicians? Bring Vitamine to your site for hands-on training in the art of ASIC repair, complete with Bitmain AMTC certification. Contact Vitamine today at dan@vmasic.com. Again, that's dan@vmasic.com. When you think of ASIC repair, think Vitamine.
Can we talk about OpCat as we kind of do our last few minutes here?
Yeah, it's you take two elements on a stack and combine them together. Concat.
Charlie, do you think we're going to see give me a possible scenario for opcodes over the next 12 to 24 months?
Ooh, that's good. I am surprised at how open the developer attitude is right now towards OpCat in particular. It's been the spicy one in public discourse. OpCat is a very broad, old school opcode that was in Bitcoin originally. Satoshi took it out. You could basically loop and create like a Stack Overflow on Bitcoin back in the day. Now does not appear to have that particular risk. There are other risks of it could add too much expressivity to Bitcoin in a way that's bad. Notable Notably, Andrew Polstra, kind of a legend in Bitcoin development, still active, loves OpCat. Some of the really smart people out there, developers, also like OpCat. There are notable opponents, like Shinobi, very against OpCat. And there's people who are kind of neutral. Reared in Code also doesn't like OpCat. But the thing is that I'm seeing is that there are a lot this is much more an engineering conversation right now, and it's less tribal. I think because we all like each other too much, which is great. It's also
not good for Bitcoin.
It's an attack vector.
I wouldn't go that far.
Well, it doesn't seem like block size war argument right now. It's interesting because I still have yet to see very many like compelling OpCat is dangerous because of this example here.
Yeah.
It's OpCat is dangerous because of things which we don't know about it. That's a very compelling argument. It's just that the longer this goes and the more people ideate it and practice and demonstrate OpCat, the more this will be we'll have like perhaps defined the map of what this could be. So
for miners and everyone else, like OpCat could possibly create a world where we have rollups, and then we have apps on top of rollups, and then we have more transaction fees, possibly.
half the things that people say you could do with a blockchain, OpCat would start enabling things of that type. Yeah. I know that's a broad, big statement. You could make Bitcoin quantum resistant, theoretically. This is a big, looming, scary future.
We'll all be dead first. But.
Yeah, we'll all be dead. There's a big thing of being able to trustlessly take or bridge your Bitcoin to other networks and other chains. OpCat would be very instrumental in doing that. Right now, there's not really good ways to trustlessly do that. But we also don't really know what OpCat can't do yet. That's part of the thing, is it's mainly theoretical up to this point. We're really trying to scope something which has not been, even as far as as a layperson, I don't think we've even really scoped what it can do. So
I think in that sense, talking about it as kind of like a generalized update, part of why some people are inclined towards OpCat is because you could emulate sort of some of the other proposed updates that are kind of being investigated to provide new transaction kind of features, right? Often kind of looped under the umbrella term covenants. And so if you've heard of like CTV and Vault, right, things of that sort, a lot of developers have kind of come out and speculated that you could emulate that in a world when OpCat has been activated. That being said, I mean, I think I am kind of the opinion that I think we're kind of in the early innings of these kind of conversations. Walt mentioned before, like incentives, and Will mentioned like MicroStrategy and the developers here and miners. The Bitcoin community has really become quite diverse, I think, and there's many different stakeholders these days and a lot of care in how the protocol evolves. And I think more voices and the different incentives behind them is certainly going to impact what actually ends up being soft fork. And at the end of the day, like, it's a social consensus thing, and a lot of these things are going to happen like in meet space, person to person,
like Bitcoin plus. I mean, this is one idea I had post China ban, was that the fact that miners, the majority of hash rate, which was like 70% in China, had migrated a lot of it to the Western Hemisphere, Canada, US and Texas and Georgia and other states, meant that we're going to have a more centralized community for moving forward opcodes or different changes to Bitcoin, because you had a lot of people in the same room for the first time, where you could have a lot of miners like live in Texas, they like live in Austin, and then they have Bitcoin plus down the road. The only issue in the way is like they don't talk to each other still. Like,
yeah,
they don't.
We're in Austin, Texas, where many, and they're probably listening. Hello, public miners. Like, probably have employees or research folks or even C-suite in this city, and this is the Bitcoin Technical Conference to be at for discussing these topics. And I think I might be the biggest miner at the conference, which is like not saying a lot. And I think that shows that we can come to consensus within each maybe small cohort of Bitcoin, but I think the different cohorts are much further removed than many people realize. The mining business is pretty far from the Bitcoin technical discussion, and that seems to me to be the chasm to cross to actually move forward any soft fork.
And the general users, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not it's pretty well I think known in discourse now that the majority of probably actual individual owners of Bitcoin are probably in emerging markets, right?
Yeah.
And so there is like many different cohorts and kind of people using Bitcoin that like their voices very well may not really be known super loudly, right? Of what their needs are. I don't know. It's it's a tricky situation trying to update a
$1 trillion network.
Yeah, a really distributed protocol is no easy thing.
Cool. Well, I think that kind of wraps up the conversation for today. We'll have more down here from Austin. We're talking with Peter Todd, a Bitcoin developer, about mining centralization, basically kind of riff on what Matt Corello and Marty Bent talked about, among other things. Maybe get into some RBF discussions as well, even though it's pretty semantically in the weeds. Charlie, Matt, anything?
No, see you, listen to Bitcoin Season 2. Got some good stuff coming out.
Walt, we'll give you the last hour.
Yeah, I think the last thing I'll say is cat means different things to different people. I think, to people at this table, it means a way to add expressivity to Bitcoin. I think for miners, it's more revenue. And I think for some people, it's food. So that's all for me.
He's been sitting on that one for a while. Okay, that is the Mining Pod. Thank you for listening. You can find us on YouTube, CoinDesk, CoinDesk TV, or just the regular RSS feed. Go check out blockspace.media for more content, including our newsletter, Bitcoin Season 2, Charlie's new podcast, and of course, the Gwart Show. He had a great conversation with Tarun Chitra about proof of work, proof of stake, and DeFi. So if you're into that kind of thing, go check out the Gwart Show on blockspace.media. Flash out to Nick Gates and also to Damian Somerset for being the producer of the show. See you guys next week.